All hope seems lost. The enemy has the upper hand in the firefight. Your platoon has been backed into the corner of a remote island somewhere on the South China Sea. Suddenly, you hear the helicopter blades cutting the air overhead. It's the Bell 360 Invictus, the Army's next-generation reconnaissance helicopter, and it's flying right overhead. The pilot's voice crackles through your radio and informs you. Our surveillance UAV drone picked up 20 Tango heat signatures approximately 300 meters northeast of your position. Sending our UAV drone to strike that position now. Then you hear a rip of the 20mm autocannon opening up the sky and the explosion of attack drones as the enemy is scattered. You return to your small combat outpost, and at the same time, the Scout 360 Invictus helicopter lands within the same walls. This is the future of over-the-shoulder close air support. But is the Army actually going to be able to pull it off this time, or is it going to be another $7 billion failure like the Commanche program? Army Aviation is currently working on building a next-generation light reconnaissance attack helicopter that I think is purpose-built for a potential future war in the South China Sea. The real question here is, what kind of attack helicopter does this attack helicopter identify as? What are the origins of this future vertical lift program? In 2013, the Army retired the aging light recon OH-58 Kiowa helicopter, but that left a capabilities gap in our light recon attack helicopter role. So since then, the Apache has had to pull double duty, doing both the heavy gunship missions and the light reconnaissance ones. But it's not really designed to do recon work very well. While the Kiowa Warrior was used extensively in the past 2 global wars, it doesn't have the same firepower as the Apache. This future vertical lift program is going to create something that's basically a cross between the Kiowa and the Apache with some brand new abilities. The last time the Army tried to replace the Kiowa, it ended in a $7 billion failure with the Commanche program in 2004. But was it really a failure if the technology from that program has been applied everywhere else, including in the helicopters in the Bin Laden raid? I spoke with Chris Gaylor, Bell's Vice President and Program Director for the 360 Invictus, to see if he could help explain what new features the Army would get with this aircraft.
This is a maneuver support type platform, flying right over the shoulder and integrated into these maneuver elements. We could see a platform like this living in cav units forward with maneuver forces. This is that reliable. It is that type of a Kiowa Warrior based maintainability. So designed from the beginning to be maintained in the mud with the soldiers forward and not have to be on an airbase somewhere.
What they mean when they say it's an over-the-shoulder aircraft is that this is a new, closer level of integration with the ground forces. Unlike the Apache, it's able to be organic to the platoon right there in the mud, forward deployed on a combat outpost directly alongside the infantry. The Invictus can do this in part due to its emphasis on reliability and its low maintenance. But to be honest, I'm not sure how I would feel about a bunch of pilot chief warrant officers stationed at my patrol base telling me what to do. Are you an officer or a sergeant? Am I supposed to salute you? Do you even know? The fly-by-wire system helps keep these costs low. And what that term means is all the joystick maneuver controls and inputs in the helicopter are sent instantly, digitally throughout the aircraft. The old systems of gears, pulleys, and levers are more delayed and leave additional room for mechanical error. The fly-by-wire system reduces the aircraft's mechanical complexity. It also allows this helicopter to be remotely controlled, so the gunner and the pilot can sit back at the combat outpost and never have to expose themselves to incoming fire. Lucky. In a future war with China or Russia, the US wouldn't have the luxury of guaranteed air superiority anymore, because the enemy would deploy their S-500 anti-air systems, which can even potentially detect and shoot down a 5th generation F-35 fighter jet. The Apache is perfect when you have control of the air and you need heavy firepower. But what if you're on a remote island in the South China Sea with almost no logistical support to speak of? The Bell 360 Invictus can work in those conditions and can outmaneuver, outrun, and avoid detection of modern anti-air systems.
You want to have a small logistical tail. This obviously will need gas to have higher reliability on the systems, and then things that can be, either changed out by a soldier maintainer rather than have to go back to a main depot or something like that.
So my first concern with this whole future vertical lift program is how realistic is it going to be for soldiers to actually maintain this at forward operating bases? It was difficult for us to get enough AA batteries, let alone some spare helicopter parts. It can reach top speeds of officially 180 knots, which is well over the Apache's 150 knots. The combat radius for the new aircraft is 250 kilometers, before it has to turn around and refuel. Its total range is 740 kilometers, with about 60 minutes of time over the objective. The Apache combat radius is only 150 kilometers. It has reduced drag thanks to its landing gear and weapon systems being able to be tucked back inside the hull, which means that the aircraft shape is harder to detect by radar. This is the definition of high-speed, low drag. It uses a single-engine General Electric T901 turboshaft engine and 4 rotor blades, and has a little help of these side wingies that help about 50% of the lift of the vehicle. The design team gave it a canted tail rotor and active rear stabilizer fin so the pilots would be able to get higher speeds and better lift. Forbes senior contributor Lauren Thompson said, quote, "The Army probably would have begun recapitalizing its aviation fleet earlier if the Cold War hadn't ended when it did, to be followed by a 20-year global war against enemies who lacked air forces or air defenses. Today, the threat has shifted to near-peer nations, meaning Russia and China. So the Army no longer can put off replacing its Cold War helicopters," end quote. I really cannot overemphasize how much losing air superiority would change literally every aspect of war for the US military in horrible ways. They haven't had to deal with contested airspace since World War II. Think of it this way, the US military called in 20,000 sorties a year within essentially what was uncontested airspace in Afghanistan, using A-10 Warthogs and Apaches the majority of the time. That should give you an idea of how much the Army relies on close air support to get them out of a bind. Without having to deal with enemy air systems, the infantry might have gotten admittedly a little bit too comfortable calling in CAS recently. Oh, I got a splinter. Let me call in close air support. Ah, stubbed my toe. Time to call in close air support. Ah, the sun got in my eyes. Hey, you got Apache assets up there in the air? Sir, what do you mean I don't qualify for close air support until I have 400,000 subscribers? I can't force them to sub. The thing that blew my mind was its new ability to fire UAV drones out into the air and then have the crew be able to monitor those drones and its thermal surveillance video feed straight from the cockpit. These drones loiter over the battlefield providing surveillance until a target is found. Then they move out of orbit, launch into missile attack mode, and strike the enemy target with a lethal payload. I'm also skeptical of this whole UAV integration system that they're touting because piloting a helicopter and coordinating with ground troops is already a huge task. So adding keeping track of drones and then troubleshooting whatever problems those drones are having, I have my doubts. But I could be wrong, and here's Bell's response to that.
We're able to take workload off of the pilot. So typically the pilot is flying an aircraft and trying to control a mission. With the digital backbone, with our flight control computers and fly-by-wire, we can take a lot of that capability of what it takes to fly the aircraft so that the pilot can lead the mission that he needs to. He can be out front with his ALE, so the ALE, air launch effect, essentially an unmanned drone that he can get situational awareness from.
Many of the CAS missions that were filled by the Apache in the Afghan war would have been better suited for something like the Scout Bell 360. A lot of times the Apache was overkill, too expensive for the requirements of the mission. The main tactic that would be used by the 360 Invictus is for it to go ahead and scout and identify targets for the heavy gunships that are more vulnerable, like the Apache, and then the Apache would destroy those targets without having to expose itself as much. The way Army aviation works is through this weird, mysterious separate rank system called the Chief Warrant Officers. With those chief pilots, you're never really sure what chain of command they fall under, since they're not really officers, but they're not exactly NCOs either, so they basically end up never having to answer to anyone. So this aircraft gives pilots and gunners a 360-degree situational awareness, where the cameras outside of the helicopter allow you to see through the cockpit with augmented reality goggles. This makes it easier to spot potential incoming fire and enemy on the ground. It's a nice feature that would have saved me a couple of car accidents in my 06 Toyota Camry. It wasn't my fault, get out of my blind spot, I'm on a Long Island Expressway here. A future battle with China or Russia would involve fights within megacities, which is something the Apache isn't really designed for. Part of the whole reason why the Army required this recon helicopter to have a small 40-meter rotor radius was so it could fly in between buildings in a densely populated urban environment, to avoid anti-air systems. Major General David Francis said, quote, "We're going to be flying in lower flight profiles than we have over the past 20 years in counterinsurgency operations. And so even today, we are changing the way we train Army aviators. But what's it actually like inside the interior and cockpit of this aircraft? Well, I got the chance to sit in the cockpit and remind myself why I would never be qualified to fly one of these things. Seriously, put more than one red button in front of me and I'm instantly lost. I will say it was comfortable as heck, sitting in there what I assume was a $600 gamer chair. The Army is moving away from the old style interior to a new glass cockpit with all of the new digital touchscreen features. It seats 2 crew, a pilot and a gunner, and it doesn't matter which spot you sit them in because they're interchangeable. I'm curious to know what you think of the Bell 360 attack helicopter and the future vertical lift program. Do you think Army Aviation needs this? Was there some key information that I missed here? Let me know in the comment section. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Follow me on Instagram for live updates at Cappy Army, and click the link in the description if you're interested in grabbing a modular musket t-shirt from our store.